Well, we've reached the end of the G20 meetings for this year. The communiqué has been issued, the press conferences have been held. The communiqué was rather bland. It's full of sentences starting with, we want to reiterate, we recognize the importance of, but it's very light on any kind of concrete agreement or commitment to any change in policy. There was quite a strong emphasis in the press conferences as opposed to the communiqué on the rebound in some of the economies. I think this is the result of the fact that the finance ministers met in July when economic indicators were quite a bit weaker than they are right now. And this communiqué has largely followed the pattern of the communiqué from the finance minister central bank heads meeting. So there is in the communiqué recognition that the recovery is not yet complete, but the language in the press conferences was a great deal more upbeat. Both Obama and Cameron, and in fact also Hollande, emphasized that their economies have turned around, they're starting to create jobs, and that the future looks rather good, rather rosy. This might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's definitely the message coming out of the mouths of the leaders as opposed to through the communiqué. The communiqué is fairly standard in terms of repeating the kinds of messages that the G20 has put out before. There's quite an emphasis on what is needed to sustain the recovery in terms of structural reform, fiscal adjustment, and financial sector regulation, but particularly on investment promotion and structural reform to promote investment. It's recognized that most of the initiatives are very country-specific. Countries that have different problems that are holding back the growth of employment. So it is a statement of collective intention rather than much that's very specific about the way that labor markets should be improved. The big issue here in this summit was, of course, Syria, and this is reflected in the press conferences. Obama's press conference, as well as Cameron's, were very predominantly about Syria. Both of them gave short, very upbeat assessments of their economic prospects and then turned immediately to Syria. All of the questions from the press were on Syria or on security-related issues. So the attention of both the press, but also the leaders themselves, was clearly on Syria, even though there was, of course, a fairly standard discussion of the economic issues at the moment. Looking forward, what does this mean for the G20? Well, it's a big challenge for Australia because I think there is a real risk that as the recovery takes place and barring any further crises, the G20 sort of folds into a format of continuing statements of commitment on the part of the leaders to the things that everybody would like to see happen, but may or may not be able to happen depending on the extent to which policy can be coordinated. So a big challenge for Australia is to try to focus on a few issues where something more concrete by way of decisions on new initiatives can actually be achieved.